You're listening to the Balanced Educator Podcast, episode number 111. Welcome to the Balanced Educator. We're your hosts, Kaylee
and Josiane from EduCalm. Our intention is to equip and empower you to feel more calm, balanced, and joyful in all aspects of your life.
Hello there and welcome. We are so excited to spend this time together with you here today. On today's episode, we are going to be interviewing Tre Gammage. Tre is an educational consultant with the Gammage Consulting Group, and he helps K-12 schools implement school-wide social and emotional learning programs. Tre recently released Every Decision Counts, a social and emotional learning workbook for middle and high school students. His weekly podcast, The Dash, features educators who are creating solutions for school communities. Tre recently interviewed me as a guest for the Dash podcast. You'll have to check it out. It's episode 149, and it's called The Balanced Educator with Kaylee Lefko. Before we get into this awesome conversation all around social emotional learning, we're so excited to share this week's sponsor, Time Timer. Using timers is such a huge part of our classroom management and making sure that we are getting the most out of our time with our students and helping them learn how to manage time. That's such an important skill to have. But what we absolutely adore about Time Timer is that it's a visual timer. And as a math teacher, I love how visually you can see the time in terms of like a fraction. So the timer has 60 minutes on it. And if you're putting, say, 15 minutes on the timer, you're going to see that as a quarter of that 60-minute time. And as the time counts down, you'll see the color disappear, which makes it so easy for students to visually be able to track that time that is passing. I love it for myself. Even I use this timer as the desktop app in my own management of my own personal time. And I am so excited to use their desktop time timer app in my classroom in the fall. What's beautiful about the desktop app is that you can have several timers running at once and you can give them different names and different colors. So you can have different timers for different groups, or you can just have timers that you save for different types of tasks. And then they have a physical time timer, which is wonderful for whole class use. They have different sizes if you want to have little ones that you use specifically for certain students. I inherited a time timer, visual timer when I moved into one of my very first classrooms, and it was one of the best tools I used for classroom management and something I will continue to use with all age groups because that visual aspect is just so useful. So if you want to check out Time Timer to learn more or to buy, go to timetimer.com/educalm. Again, that's timetimer.com/educalm, which is spelled EduCalme. All right, let's get into this wonderful interview with Tre Gammage. Hello there, Tre. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Kaylee.
Can you start us off by introducing yourself to our audience? And can you let us know kind of like how did life lead you to where you are today?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm a man of words. I love to talk, and it's been there all my life. In kindergarten, actually, I'm not going to start my whole story from kindergarten, but in kindergarten, my teacher said that I would be a child psychologist and a baseball player. And they weren't too far off. All through my life, I couldn't help but want to support kids and want them to feel happy. I did end up studying psychology in college, playing football, and also studying psychology and playing football. So that's a little off than child psychologist and baseball, but pretty on par. Throughout my college journey, I had opportunities to really learn about the social aspects of psychology, the abnormal or mental health side, and also the cognitive piece and how the brain works. And during my last semester of college, I was in Luxembourg, actually, studying abroad. I decided not to play my fifth year of football. And in that time, Kaylee, and you would appreciate this with mindfulness, I spent a lot of time alone. Being over in Europe, I didn't have access to internet or Wi-Fi, so I was traveling through countries like Italy and Czech Republic, Netherlands and Portugal, Spain, and I didn't have this access to Wi-Fi. So I really got to be mindful of all that was happening in my life and taking it in. And in that time, that's when I really figured out what I wanted to do when I came back from Europe. Because 2 days after I came back from Europe, I ended up graduating and had to find a job. And that's what brought me to South Carolina, where I began working at a residential high school with about 300 of the smartest students in South Carolina. It's a free high school, but it's state funded. And when I tell you these kids are bright, they are bright. Perfect ACT scores, 4.0, 5.0 GPAs. And I have really had a chance to dig into education there, living with 45 students on my floor as a residence life coordinator. And in that time, I was also building my rapport and background as a professional speaker, actually. Through Toastmasters, I earned my way and was blessed to go to the World Championship of Public Speaking in 2016 and made it to the semifinal round, where I was humbly defeated by Josephine Lee, who was the third greatest speaker in the world that year. And it just taught me a lot about life. I learned that life is all about me and it's not about me. And it's all about me because the only thing that I can control is the decisions that I make every day. And it's not about me because if I'm only worried about my decisions, I'm not going to be motivated to move forward. So I started to really try to think about how I could add value to everybody that I come in contact with. And that's what got me started in education consulting, working with teachers as an emotional coach. And one of the schools I was working with had a guidance counselor who actually left for a birthday trip to Las Vegas and never came back. So I assumed a role of the guidance counselor. I've been building guidance departments, college and career preparation, high school program management, behavior, SEL. I've had a really great chance to put my hands in a lot of places administratively in K-12 education over the past 5 years. So that's where we're at now, and continuing to work to bridge gaps in education and help to create opportunities for students and educators to grow, to lead, and experience.
What a great story. I love hearing, how each step led you to the next. And there's definitely an undercurrent in your story of that mindfulness aspect of, paying attention to the present moment, going with what your gut is telling you to go with. And it seems that you've kind of found yourself always in a situation that's like the next right step for you. It's really interesting.
That's a lovely way that you put that. I feel like I when I started my podcast, The Dash, which you were graciously a guest on as well, the idea was how to turn pain into your platform for purpose. So always very aware and reflective about what's going on and how to help that and use that as fuel for your next step in life. Growing up, I also did move 11 different times by the time I finished high school or college and went to 8 different schools. So there was a lot of change that was happening, and I had to really be comfortable with myself to take on all those changes and still be my best self on a day-to-day or school-to-school or location-to-location.
That sounds like that experience must be a really big part of how and why you are the person you are today. Can you talk a little bit about what you learned from being a student in so many different locations? I'm sure you have lots of takeaways from that you've taken into your perspective of the work that you do in schools.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the main thing is just understanding what students go through, and I understand that in my own life, I was able to, I feel like I was privileged to live 2 different lives at the same time. My father was in my father's family. Gammage is one of the most well-known families in the city of South Bend. He was a very successful defense attorney and became the 3rd Black judge in the history of our 200-year county. And so I got to go to his house and experience wealth, information, understanding, and a whole lot of knowledge. And then 20 minutes down the road, I would go to my mother's house, who was so full of love and so full of joy and faith But if I asked her for $20, it would be the last $20 in her bank account or her wallet. So I got to see both of those lifestyles at the same time. And it gave me a level of empathy and understanding that many people don't get to see. So I was able to see both sides of that coin and the people that I met along the journey. I've always been a people person. So the people that I met, I was able to learn from. I didn't believe in making every mistake on my own, but I believed in learning from other people's mistakes and taking on the wisdom from my elders. And I listened. I was always a listener, even to my parents and the people that sometimes we get tired of. But I listened to folks and I listened to their guidance. And really, personal development is a big thing for me. I have been an avid reader of Napoleon Hill, Og Mandino, Tony Robbins, Les Brown, and I found that there's like 10 to 15 life principles, right? And if you pick 3 to 5 of those life principles, you're on a very solid path to get to where you want to go in life. And so for me, it's helping kids and helping educators understand what principles that they need to make every decision count and really guide them through their life.
Yeah, I love that. Could you speak on some of those principles that you help teachers to, decide how do they decide which one is the right for them?
For sure, for sure. So I've put it in my own words in my new book, actually, Every Decision Counts. In a few of the lessons, the first one is to understand that failing is not a loss at your first attempt in learning. So you either win or you lose in every situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
I remember the first time I walked into a school as a consultant, I had teachers. What I noticed about the teachers is they were reacting to students' behavior and not responding to it. A student would do something and they would react with a yell, or they'd react with stop that. They would react with things that were not restorative, but more punitive type of punishment. So it was helping them to understand, like, hey, you can slow down and understand that this, just because this child is not on task, it doesn't have to ruin your lesson or your whole lesson plan. You can respond to that, redirect the student, or put them in a position where they can still learn and the rest of the class can still learn as well. I think the second one is about surrounding yourself with only quality people. And that came from a man that I met who was doing well in his life as an Army veteran, but at some point drifted off in the wrong direction and ended up homeless for some time. And it wasn't until he was splashed in the face with a puddle and on the verge of taking his own life that he realized that he had to start surrounding himself with only quality people. And they say you're like the people that you surround yourself with the most. So whether it's a book or a video or your best friend and your family, you've got to put yourself around good people that are going to encourage you and help you grow to the place that you need to get to as an educator and as a human. And third, I'll just do one more. One of my favorites is making new mistakes. I think a lot of times we have an unfair expectation or standard for our lives as individuals and want things to be perfect or want things to go a certain way. And if just one piece of that puzzle doesn't fit right, we feel like a failure. But it's okay, one, to fail, and it's okay to make mistakes. The goal is to try not to make the same mistake twice. So essentially, make new mistakes in your life and grow from those things that you're learning from right there. So that's 3 of them that I personally attest to and try to facilitate in the way that I live my life.
I love that. I think those are all really great ways, things that teachers can implement into their own lives and anyone can implement into their own lives so that they're always, growing, learning, and continuing to move forward and upward. So,
without a doubt.
Yeah. So you're an educational consultant and you help schools to implement school-wide SEL programs. I'd love to know, in your work with schools, what's kind of the most common problem that you're seeing schools struggling with right now?
I think it's a systematic approach. I know that there's always a lot going on at schools. And when you let's take it here. If a teacher is in class and every time you send a student out of class, you send that authority out of class with you. And when you send someone out of class, that student is no longer learning. The teacher is no longer teaching. And now the principal is putting out fires and babysitting rather than administrating the successes and planning events for the school. So from that standpoint, you've really got to get to a place in a position where you have a system to operate your school. And my focus is on SEL and behavior. So what I see is there's a documentation process, there's a PBIS protocol and tiers of intervention that you have to follow. There is a behavior consequence situation. There's the parent communication. And then you have your curriculums that you try to embed or try to implement, but they're not done with fidelity. So most schools are trying and they're making these attempts to be better with their classroom management, restorative practices, but there's not a fluid system for success. There's not one fluid system. Everything operates in its own silo, and that creates inefficiency, overwhelmingness, burnout, and just difficulty overall. So I try to really help schools figure out how to put their assets into one fluid system where they can operate in a seamless process, essentially.
That makes so much sense. I think when we get stuck sort of dealing with the symptoms of a problem and not the root cause of the problem, you're kind of just putting a Band-Aid on top of a cut that's infected rather than, dealing with the infection. So it sounds like you're really taking an approach that looks at all these different sides of it and is working towards finding a solution in the root cause that is going to then be a domino effect towards the symptoms that we're seeing.
For sure. Well, and I want to be clear too that I'm a big believer in asset-based community development or even personal development, if you would like to say that. And what that means is the assets are the talents, the tools, the skills, the resources that already exist in your community or your school community. And how do we maximize the opportunity within those resources? So a lot of times it's not even that I want to ask a school to spend more money or adopt a new program, but how do we use what you do have and use it to the best of its ability? How do we find the teachers how do we help them do what they love to do what they like to do what they're good at on your campus, and create an environment or a culture that uplifts everybody and lets everybody operate in their areas of strength so that way we can minimize those weaknesses.
Love that. If we can all be doing the parts and bringing to the table the things that we're passionate about, then that's just naturally going to uplift everyone. We all want to do more of the things that we love and less of the things that we don't love to do. But often we get stuck doing a lot of the things that don't bring us joy and don't fuel that fire of why we are educators. So that makes so much sense to kind of play on everyone's strengths and figure out how can we fit these together so that we can make a better community at this school. That's great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's important. It's valuable. I always think that the person has to come first before pedagogy and content. The culture is what's going to drive your instruction and the success of your school.
Yeah, absolutely. So in your work with schools and your interviews with educators on your podcast, The Dash, which is a great podcast. You do such an amazing job interviewing lots of different educators from all over that have really cool things that they're bringing to the table in their schools and their communities. I highly recommend that whoever is in this audience listening, I think they'd really like your podcast as well. But I'd love to know, you talk with a lot of educators. What is working right now in education? Like, what's a common thread between the teachers and schools that are making a really positive impact on their students?
Yeah, I think it's just that what we are talking about. I'm seeing such a huge, SEL and the whole child learning is moving from trending to becoming a standard. And in my research, I found that SEL and these kind of practices actually started research in 1990. So it's been about 30 years, and it's amazing actually how long it's taken for that to come to the forefront. But as I kind of relaunched my podcast after the first 72 episodes, I started to realize a running theme through interviews that I was having of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of SEL, of really supporting staff leadership. There's a trickle-down effect that comes into place. And when your principal comes into school, the direction that they give trickles down to everybody else in the classroom. And so specifically in America, and primarily, I guess, for underrepresented or underserved schools, it's about building that whole child and giving them the skills that they need to succeed outside of the classroom. And I think taking that a step deeper, I think we're starting to realize that there's up to 75% of our kids are not going to college. They're going to work right after high school. And so if they're going straight to work, we have to give them the skills that they need to be successful in that job. And that's not always geometry or calculus, but that's your communication skills, your ability to understand and read the verbal and nonverbal cues of the people that you're around, or even how to resolve the conflicts on the playground. How are we building the skills for our students to be global citizens? And that seems to be the focus on the Dash podcast and with the educators that I'm talking with is building up students, building up the school community as a whole, not just the educator or the student, but thinking about the school partners, school leadership, parents, and everything else in between.
It takes a village to raise a child. So that makes so much sense that we would integrate all these different pieces and create a community that's supporting the growth of our students. That's great. So I'd love to know now, what made you decide to help schools to implement SEL? Like, why do you think SEL is so important? And maybe when was that moment that you recognized, like, okay, this is the solution that I want to help people to integrate?
So yeah, it was a journey for me, and I think I arrived at it about a year ago, about 2 years ago, really. So again, with my background in psychology and SEL kind of go hand in hand. As I started consulting, I understood that there had to be a way to measure success or improvement of the teachers that I was working with. And because it was psychology and my first role was as an emotional coach, I found assessments that revolved around emotional intelligence and communication. There's DISC assessments that you may be familiar with, and there's also EIQ, which is emotional intelligence quotient. I started doing research on those things, EIQ, DISC, communication, and those really spoke to me. So as I was going in with teachers and facilitating these trainings in these education organizations and facilitating these trainings, I also was continuing my research, and I understood that the education term for emotional intelligence and communication is SEL. From there, when I found CASTLE, the Collaborative Academic for Social and Emotional Learning, I was just blown out of the water, because here they have a framework that helps you implement SEL from a school-wide or even district-wide perspective. And it also helps you with different curriculums. And like I was talking about, the asset-based community development, they have programs in a framework that allows you to plug and play everything that you need to succeed in your school. I'm not a person that believes in going in and rewriting the book. I believe in coming in and seeing what you have, what you're good at, and how do we bridge the gaps that we're not meeting yet. And so that's been a journey that I'm getting to now. So now I know exactly what it is about, where my heart is at, where my mission is at, as they say in business, narrowing down your niche. SEL is something that I can really dig in on and really become an expert at from now and even moving into the future.
That's so great. So you have a new SEL workbook. You mentioned it a little bit at the beginning of this podcast. Can you talk more about this workbook, Every Decision Counts?
For sure. So the first 3 lessons that I were talking about are principles of making new mistakes, only quality people, and failing got me started are the first 3 chapters of that book. And so I've tried a few manuscripts throughout time over the past 4 or 5 years, but it finally hit me too. I didn't have an audience. And it hit me at one point that I actually went into the Dash podcast and I found episodes of principles, of some of those principles that I thought were the greatest lessons that I had learned through the podcast and that I could also connect back to my childhood. And so actually what I did was transcribe those episodes and then translate that content to a message or a principle that would serve a middle and high school students. And the way I did that was by writing letters. I've got 4 brothers and a sister and work with hundreds and thousands of kids, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands. And I started writing them letters. So it would be, Dear Saeed, my little brother, here's why every decision counts. Dear Joe, this is why you should surround yourself with only quality people. Dear Susie, this is what it means to praise your insecurities. And so I from a really personal perspective and really personal touch, I wrote letters to kids to young adults from 2 pages to 10 pages and ask them really reflective questions that inspire them to engage with their peers, engage with their own self-reflection, and even adults in their own life or mentors that they've never met through books and things. So I thought it was important to align these letters with national guidance and also SEL standards. And so each chapter is aligned to core standards of guidance and also SEL. And it's a workbook that you can work through. It's really short, 55 pages, but it's got really powerful lessons that students are loving. I'm teaching my first class on it right now. I have the first session, taught the first 2 or 3 chapters to an 8th grade cohort and a 9th grade cohort. And the conversation and the questions that they are asking about this book and surrounding themselves with quality people and the experiences that they've already had in their own social histories are just coming up and boiling to the surface. And once you become aware of your lifestyle or what you've been through, now you can reflect on where that comes from and why it's important to you. And then finally make that transition to moving forward and become the person that you want to be in the next phase of your life.
I love that. Really, self-reflection, I think, is the core of personal growth and the core of, growing even professionally. Like everything that you do in your life, if you can understand yourself better, it helps you to become a best version of yourself. That sounds like something too that I think students at that age, middle school and high school, would be really interested in. I mean, at those age groups, they're very interested in themselves, who they're becoming. They're trying to figure out their identity. So anything that can help them to reflect on that and make decisions of, okay, based on how I act and how I am in the world, like who do I want to be? Where do I want to go? How do I want to contribute? So sounds like a really great workbook and a really good resource.
Well, and I think what I noticed as well is that I heard Les Brown, I think, say that most people live the same year 75 times and then call that a life. Or I hear Earl Nightingale say that if you ask 100 people at the age of 20, how many of them want to be successful, they'll all say yes. But by the age of 60, only 5 will have made it. And he defines success as the progressive realization towards a worthy ideal or progressing towards a goal that you want to achieve. Being a teacher because you want to teach. Being an athlete because you want to be an athlete. Doing the thing that you love because it's the thing that you love to do. And most adults are stuck for 20 years, for 25 years. And I'm talking about my closest family members or the people that are closest to me, talk about wanting to move but aren't able to make that change. And I feel like middle school is a time where you really get to make some big decisions. In middle school, I was a chubby kid who couldn't dribble, didn't fit in, had long hair. People thought I was a girl. I was insecure. I had some family issues at home. It was a rough time for me, but I was also able to grow through that and was fortunate enough to have people that supported me through it. I realized that not everybody has that. So that's also why it was important to put a culturally responsive book that shares stories about, chapter 3 about making new mistakes is about a young man named Robert Torres who was involved in guns, gangs, violence, and drugs, and was about to go to jail on a federal RICO charge, which means he was going away for a long time. But he made a decision to swim instead of sink. And he turned his life around, became the valedictorian of his high school, and is now the top athletic trainer in the city of South Bend. Or in chapter 6 with Ashley Varner, who she self-described too tall, too skinny, flat-chested with no butt. And now she is a international model for Paul Mitchell and for Nike and for LA Fashion Week and doing all these things because she decided to praise her insecurity. So it's also real lessons and real life stories with people that look like you or a diverse array of people, I should say, that may look like you and may not, but the stories, the truths that they share are relevant regardless of your background.
I love that. And, we can all learn so much from stories of struggle that then turned into triumph, because I think kids most of us, you just think that life is going to be easy. You think that adults have it all figured out. And, it's a pretty rude awakening when you reach adulthood and you're like, yeah, I don't have it figured out. Yeah. Like life is just a series of lessons learned. And then I get better after I make mistakes because I've learned new things. So I think it can be important for middle schoolers and high schoolers to know that it's not always going to be easy, but what are you going to learn from the mistakes that you make and the struggles that you go through? It's so important.
A lot of times we're afraid to even try because we don't want to get laughed at. We don't want to raise our hand because we don't want to be wrong, and then the kids call me stupid. But that's how you learn. That's how you become and step into who you really are.
Yeah, you have to make those mistakes, and yeah, I was like a self-proclaimed perfectionist for so long in my life. I always wanted to do everything perfect. And it was really when I became a teacher and I recognized that sometimes no matter how much you prepare for something, you think it's going to go perfect. Once you actually do it, it's not always exactly as you imagine. So as a teacher, I would plan these lessons and I had visualized in my head how it was all going to go. And then sometimes it would go really well. Sometimes it would bomb. The kids wouldn't be, excited about the things that I thought they were going to be excited about, or something would go faster than I thought it would go or slower than I thought it would go. And so I started to learn that, it's best to just try things, know that it's not going to go perfect the first time, and then improve on it later. And that's been a really useful learning for me once we started EduCalm, because everything is brand new and everything is just, a lesson waiting to be learned. You try it, it doesn't go the way you thought it was going to go, so you adjust. And if we can explain that or bring that to students' awareness, especially in that middle school and high school age, I think that can really help them to have the perspective they need to be resilient in those tough times that will come up in life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's of the utmost importance. I remember, I think when you, especially just putting my teacher hat on, when I lesson plan or when I'm thinking about even facilitating this book, I have a plan. And since I have that plan, I'm not tied to it though. I'm not going to be disappointed if I don't get through all 3 of the first chapters. Example, the 8th grade cohort I was working with, they were not as talkative, but they did more reflects. They weren't as talkative to the whole group, but they were more reflective in their conversations on their own. And we got through the first 3 chapters. The 9th grade cohort, which was a little more mature, they were asking so many questions that we did not get to the 3rd chapter. But I wanted to be student led, and I see myself more of a facilitator. To facilitate means to make easier. And one of my mission, my personal mission in life, is to facilitate purpose. And that translates to making it easier to do what you love. And I know that when you see someone doing what you love, and you talked about how when you started doing yoga and you brought that into the classroom, kids started seeing the change in you and you started to see the change in them. When you do what you love, it either makes people want to be a part of that goal or that dream that you have, or it inspires them to start wanting to live their own dream. And so that's what I really want kids to get out of Every Decision Counts as well, is that, either attach yourself to somebody's dream or figure out how you can start living your own. And these principles and these lessons that you're working through are helping you grow to a place where you can start to make every decision count in your own life.
That is so great. Well, Tre, I think that our listeners are going to want to connect with you after this interview and learn more about you. What is the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, everything is at Tre Gammage. So my website is a great place, tregammage.com. On there, you can set up a problem call with me or even request a podcast interview and find your own copies of the book. And then on social media, I'm on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and with Instagram, whatever else there is, I think I'm on there. The podcast is on iTunes and Stitcher and SoundCloud, Spotify, wherever you listen, it's at. So my name is Gammage, it's like damage with a G and Gammage. And I'm so grateful to be with you here today and just continue to spread a message of mindfulness, of awareness, and SEL.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tre. And for our listeners, we'll put all those links in the show notes as well. So you can go to educalm.com, find this episode on the podcast page, and we'll have all the links to Tre's website and his podcast there. Awesome. Thank you, Tre, so much for being here with us today.
It's my absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
What an awesome conversation. It always inspires me so much talking to other people that are as passionate about social emotional learning as Josiane and I are. It makes me so excited for the future, knowing that social emotional learning is becoming the norm in the classroom. I think that we are creating a next generation of more kind, compassionate, caring kids that are going to go and change the world and just make it better. If you're feeling inspired too, and you want to bring mindfulness in your classroom using our social emotional learning program, EduCalm Classroom, your exit ticket for today is to go to educalm.com. That's spelled EduCalme, and get started with our EduCalm Classroom program that's going to give you absolutely everything you need to start teaching social emotional learning in your classroom through mindfulness. You won't have to do any prep because we've done it all for you. All you have to do is sign up, log in, and press play. We even have training in there just in case you want some extra training on how to use this program before you get started. So we've covered all the bases for you. Again, go to educalm.com. That's EduCalme to get started. Thank you so much for sharing your time with us. We are so grateful that you're part of this awesome community. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with a friend or a colleague that you think would get value from it too. Have a wonderful week.